Hello, and welcome to Ninja Academy's timing tutorial series. In this tutorial, we will review checking the timing of an existing segment. By the end of this video, you will know how to tell if a segment is late, on time, or early. Here is a segment that we think may be slightly late, but it's hard to tell just by looking at it. To check whether the segment really is late, the first thing we need to do is to pause the segment timer screen line at the very first hint of the voice. Let's try it out. The ah sound you just heard is the first hint of voice of the segment. I'll play it one more time in case you missed it. Now that we are paused at the first hint of the voice, we look to see that the green line is overlapping the segment's starting line. Notice that the subtitle box has not yet appeared. When the green line is overlapping the segment's starting line, the segment is considered late because the first hint of voice is audible before the subtitle box appears. This segment is just barely late, so we only need to adjust the segment to start 0.1 second earlier. To do this, select the segment, then press Ctrl or Command if you're using a Mac, plus the left arrow key one time.
I walked along the river that night.
Here is another example of a late segment. We can tell the segment is probably late just by looking at it. Usually a segment that is on time will have a small gap between the segment's starting line and the beginning of the blue wave. In this example, the segment and the blue wave starts at the same time, which means the segment most likely appears after the voice. So sometimes the waveform can trick us, so it's always a good idea to double check that the segment is truly late. To check, we again pause at the first hint of the voice. When the green line, where we heard the first hint of the voice, is before the segment's starting line, the segment is late. We need to adjust the segment to start earlier in order to include the first part of the voice.
With a river wind in my face and the taste of it on my lips.
Now that we have adjusted the segment to be on time, you can see there is a small gap between the segment's starting line and the beginning of the blue wave. We have covered how to tell when segments are late. Now let's go over the difference between an on-time segment and an early segment. With both on-time and early segments, the first hint of voice can be heard after the segment's starting line. In other words, the subtitle box will appear, and then the voice will start. The distinction between on-time and early can be made in how soon the voice starts after the subtitle box appears. On-time segments start as close to the segment starting line as possible without becoming late. Let's first see how to tell when a segment is on time. Just as we did when checking late segments, we need to pause the segment timer when we hear the first hint of voice. Now with the green line paused at the first hint of voice, press Shift plus the left arrow key one time to move the green line 0.1 seconds earlier. If the green line now overlaps the segment's starting line, then the segment is already on time. As you can see, this segment is on time.
And I stood there listening.
Now let's look at an early segment. Again, we pause the segment timer when we hear the first hint of voice. Then we press Shift plus the left arrow key one time. See how the green line is still to the right of the segment starting line? That means the segment is early. We need to adjust the segment to start at least 0.1 seconds later or closer to the voice.
A sudden excitement.
To summarize, a segment is late if the first hint of voice can be heard on the segment's starting line or before the segment's starting line. A segment is on time if the segment starts no more than 0.1 seconds before the first hint of voice. In other words, the segment is on time when it starts as close to the voice as possible without the segment becoming late. A segment is early if the segment starts more than 0.1 seconds before the first hint of voice. In other words, the segment is early if the segment starts significantly earlier than the voice. Now that you have the ability to tell when a segment is late, on time, or early, you can adjust the starting times of segments to get that perfectly timed segment.